Gonzalez. He said, "The Vice President and both chambers of Congress had their lives put in grave danger as a result of the President's actions and the events leading up to and on January 6th. During the attack itself, the President abandoned his post while many members asked for help, thus further endangering all present. These are fundamental threats not just to people's lives, but to the very foundation of our republic." And now I'd like to show what members of Congress said leading up to the most bipartisan impeachment vote in U.S. history. Because I do want everyone watching, especially President Trump's supporters, to see firsthand what I believe we all feel, that what President Trump did was not appropriate, that it was not American, and that it absolutely cannot stand.
What he has done and what he has caused here is something that we've never seen before in our history.
All indications are that the president has become unmoored, not just from his duty, nor even his oath, but from reality itself.
The president's role in this insurrection is undeniable, both on social media ahead of January 6th and in his speech that day. He deliberately promoted baseless theories, creating a combustible environment of misinformation and division. To allow the President of the United States to incite this attack without consequences is a direct threat to the future of this democracy.
After this trial, I hope you will come together and cast your vote and make absolutely clear how we as a Congress and as a nation feel about what Donald Trump did by convicting him. And to prevent this from being only the beginning, as President Trump said, and to deter future presidents who do not like the outcome of a national election from believing they can follow in President Trump's footsteps. It is what our Constitution requires. It is what our country deserves.
Representative DeGette will now return to show how extremists were emboldened by the insurrection and plan to attack the inauguration.
My colleagues have showed you the overwhelming evidence of how President Trump's conduct assembled, incited, and inflamed the mob. We showed how and why this attack, this violence, was not only foreseeable, but preventable. We showed that President Trump knew his conduct could and would result in violence, and that when the attack occurred, he did not fulfill his duty as commander-in-chief and defend us. Instead, he was delighted. Donald Trump incited a violent insurrection, and he failed to defend our nation, our Capitol, this Congress, and our law enforcement from the attack he incited. Now I want to turn to the impact, the long-term harm of this conduct. My colleagues and I will walk through the breadth and gravity of this harm. I'd like to start with the effect President Trump's conduct had on our domestic security. We saw firsthand how Donald Trump's conduct emboldened and escalated domestic violence extremists. These folks are known in the law enforcement community as DVEs. These threats were and are made worse by President Trump's refusal to take accountability and his refusal to forcibly denounce what his own FBI identified as some of the most dangerous elements of our country. Even as the attack was underway, he tweeted words of support to his violent supporters. And then, in the aftermath on January 7th, President Trump made it clear this was only the beginning.
And to all of my wonderful supporters, I know you are disappointed but I also want you to know that our incredible journey is only just beginning.
And he was right. Unless we take action, the violence is only just beginning. In the aftermath of the attack, we saw a huge rise in threats from domestic violent extremists, including specific threats to the inauguration in D.C. and also to all 50 state capitals. Our intelligence agencies confirmed that in addition to these specific threats, President Trump's conduct emboldened the very same violent groups who initiated the attack and sparked new violent coalitions. These groups believe that they're following his orders. They believe that their acts of insurrection and violence are patriotic. Violence is never patriotic, and it's never American. It's not the Democratic way, and it's not the Republican way. After the attack, the nation's top defense and law enforcement agencies reported an increase in credible threats to the inauguration from Donald Trump's supporters. On January 13, 2021, a joint intelligence bulletin issued by the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the National Counterterrorism Center found, quote, since the 6th January event, violent online rhetoric regarding the 20 January presidential inauguration has increased, with some calling for unspecified, quote, justice for the 6th January fatal shooting by law enforcement of a participant who had illegally entered the Capitol building, and another posting that, quote, many armed individuals would return on 19 January. The agencies also made clear why these threats were escalating, especially regarding the inauguration. The report explained that a primary motivating factor was, quote, the shared false narrative of a stolen election and opposition to the change in control of the executive and legislative branches of the federal government may lead some individuals to adopt the belief that there is no political solution to address their grievances and that violent action is necessary. In other words, President Trump's spreading of inflammatory disinformation about the election incited the insurrection on January 6th and may lead to further violence. Online, just as they did prior to the January 6th attack, Trump supporters took to the internet to organize and document their desire and plans for future violence at President Biden's inauguration. And indeed, in the days shortly after the attack, several posters on extremist social media websites made further plans for violence. They posted, quote, many of us will return on January 19, 2021, carrying our weapons in support of our nation's resolve, to which the world will never forget. We will come in numbers no standing army or police agency can match. Quote, we took the building once and we can take it again. Other users, eager to participate in additional attacks, confirmed that they were waiting on President Trump's instructions about what to do next. Referring to a future planned attack, a user on the online platform known as Gab posted, quote, I'd like to come do this, but want to know, does our president want us there? Awaiting instructions. In fact, in the days leading up to the inauguration, multiple individuals, many potentially in an attempt to carry out the plots that I just previewed, were arrested in Washington, D.C., including on serious weapons charges. One of those men was Couy Griffin, the founder of Cowboys for Trump, who took part in the Capitol attack and was also arrested on January 17th. Here's what he said about his plans for violence.
You know, you want to say that that was a mob? You want to say that was a violence? No, sir. No, ma'am. No, we could have a Second Amendment rally on those same steps that we had that rally yesterday. You know, and if we do, then It's going to be a sad day because there's going to be blood running out of that building, but at the end of the day, you mark my word, we will plant our flag on the desk of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
Blood running out of the building, this building, the Capitol, where all of us are right now. Now, the name Couy Griffin may sound familiar because he previously faced controversy for a May 2020 video where he said, quote, "The only good Democrat is a dead Democrat." Hear it from him yourself.
Where I've come to the conclusion that the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat.
Now, when he said this, President Trump actually retweeted Griffin and thanked him for that sentiment. When Donald Trump retweeted this, he was no stranger to Griffin. In fact, in March 2019, over a year earlier, Griffin and Trump had spoken on the phone for nearly 30 minutes. President Trump's conduct, without a doubt, made it clear that he supported Griffin. In fact, Griffin even said so himself. As Griffin later said about President Trump retweeting his inflammatory comment about the dead Democrats, quote, "It really means a lot to me because I know the President of the United States has my back." Remember, this is a man who was here on January 6th, who was arrested after threatening to come back here to make blood come running out of this building. Threats like Griffin's have triggered a deployment of forces, the likes of which we have never seen. There were approximately 25,000 National Guard troops brought in from around the country to protect D.C. leading up to and on Inauguration Day. As you know, many of those troops are still here. Take a look at that. These were scenes that played out all over the country. 5 days following the siege on the Capitol, on January 11, 2021, the FBI warned that, quote, "Armed protests are being planned at all 50 state capitals from 16 January through at least 20 January, and at the U.S. Capitol from 17 January through 20 January. As a result, at least 21 states activated their National Guards in preparation for potential attacks." President Trump's incitement has reverberated around the country, prompting massive law enforcement mobilization in several state capitals, including Washington, Illinois, Michigan, and Georgia. Look at these photos. This is what Donald Trump has done to America. This massive deployment of law enforcement has cost the taxpayers dearly. The National Guard deployment to D.C. alone is expected to cost at least $480 million. The bills are already also racking up in the states. North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Wisconsin have each spent about $500,000 to safeguard their capitals in the run-up to the inauguration. Ohio spent $1.2 million over the same 2-week period. And remember, this is at a time when state budgets are already suffering under the weight of the pandemic. Our brave service members showed up. Thanks to their dedication and their vigilance, the inauguration and the days leading up to it mercifully proceeded without incident. In fact, after news broke of law enforcement's preparedness for further attacks, leaders of the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters militia, the organizers of the Million MAGA March, they all now told their followers to avoid protests up to or leading up to the inauguration for fear that law enforcement would crush them and arrest rioters who showed up. Thank God there wasn't an insurrection sequel here on January 20th. But look at the price we've paid. The price that we're still paying It's not just dollars and cents. This capital has become a fortress, as state capitals have all across the country. Our constituents no longer have access to the elected representatives. Every Democrat and Republican, including people who came here on January 6th peacefully, is paying the price. And it's not just a loss of access. It's a dimming of their freedom. It's a dimming of all of our freedom. We must uphold our oaths, as the tens of thousands of law enforcement officers have done in the wake of January 6th. Because if we do not, President Trump's mob stands ready for more attacks. Now, this should be no surprise. Having a commander-in-chief who incites violence has given life to the existing violent groups he spent years cultivating and has inspired new coalitions among extremist groups who actually view January as a success. According to the FBI, President Trump's assemblage of his mob was particularly dangerous because, quote, in-person engagement between DVEs of differing ideological goals during the Capitol breach likely served to foster connections which may increase DVE's willingness, capability, and motivation to attack and undermine a government they view as illegitimate. In other words, they all got to talking to each other. This bulletin by our own Intelligence Committee was also confirmed by concrete evidence. Rioters celebrated their roles in the January 6th attack on social media. They boasted about their success in breaching the Capitol and forcing members of Congress and the Vice President to evacuate. Take, for example, right-wing provocateur Nick Fuentes. The day before the Capitol insurrection, Fuentes said this on his internet show.
What can you and I do to a state legislator besides kill him? Although we should not do that. I'm not advising that, but I mean, what else can you do, right?
Fuentes was at the Capitol on January 6th and praised the insurrection on a live stream as glorious and awe-inspiring. He later said, quote, "We forced a joint session of Congress and the Vice President to evacuate because Trump supporters were banging down and then successfully burst through the doors." Fuentes was not the only provocateur to revel in the violence. According to Mike Dunn, a member of the Boogaloo Boys, an anti-government movement whose adherents helped to lead multiple groups in storming the Capitol, the Boogaloo Boys will be, quote, working overtime to capitalize on the January 6th riots and hope it will lead to more action. They said, quote, just know there's more to come. Proud Boys members were bragging about the attack on the Capitol. One post on the Proud Boys Telegram channel said, people saw what we can do. They know what we're up to, they know, and they want in. The leader of the Proud Boys himself sent the same message. Enrique Tarrio said the Proud Boys would be active during Biden's presidency. Tarrio stated, "You're definitely going to see more of us." Extremist groups are also boasting that the attack on our Capitol is a boon for their recruitment efforts. 3% Security Force leader Chris Hill says he's been contacted by several people interested in joining since the insurrection. And as one expert who focuses on domestic extremism, Jared Holt, explained, by all measurable effects, this was a far-right extremist, one of the most successful attacks that they've ever launched. They're talking about this as the first stab in a greater revolution. And as indicated by Mr. Holt, their perceived success has given them encouragement to continue and to escalate attacks. Intelligence agencies have also noted that these extremist groups will, unfortunately, be targeting vulnerable minority communities in the U.S. A January 27, 2021 DHS bulletin warned, quote, long-standing racial and ethnic tension of the sort that led to a man killing 23 people at an El Paso Walmart will continue to grow and motivate further attacks. The January 13 Joint Intelligence Bulletin report stated that in addition to the other types of violence listed, DVEs may be incited to carry out more violence, including violence against racial, ethnic, and religious minorities and associated institutions, journalists, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and other targets common among some DVEs. These prejudiced elements could be seen visibly in the crowd that attacked the Capitol. Pictured here is Robert Packer. Robert Packer is an avowed white supremacist and Holocaust denier who proudly wore that sweatshirt which states, quote, Camp Auschwitz. These prejudiced elements could also be heard from the crowds. As you've heard, the insurrectionists that attacked the Capitol on January 6th hurled racial slurs, including at black police officers. One officer described the trauma he experienced when the rioters seized the Capitol. He said, quote, I'm a black officer. There was a lot of racism that day. I was called racial slurs, and in the moment, I didn't process this as traumatic. I was just trying to survive. I just wanted to get home, to see my daughter again. I couldn't show weakness. I finally reached a safe place, surrounded by officers. I was able to cry, to let it out, to attempt to process it. These extremist groups were emboldened because President Trump told them repeatedly that their insurrectionist activities were the pinnacle of patriotism. Well, let today be the day that we reclaim the definition of patriotism. Impeachment is not to punish, but to prevent. We are not here to punish Donald Trump. We are here to prevent the seeds of hatred that he planted from bearing any more fruit. As my colleagues showed, this was not the first time that President Trump inspired violence, but it must be the last time that he's given a platform to do so. This must be our wake-up call. We must condemn it because the threat is not over. President Trump refused to condemn this type of violence. Instead, over and over again, he's encouraged it. Our response must be different this time. We simply cannot sweep this under the rug. We must take a united stand, all of us, that this is not American. Think back to August 2017, when a young woman was murdered during a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, West Virginia. Her name was Heather Heyer. Her mother's name is Susan Breaux. Ms. Breaux has been a steadfast advocate for her daughter's memory. In a 2018 interview, she expressed concern that people had rushed too quickly to reconciliation without accountability.
If you rush to heal, if you rush to everybody grab each other and sing Kumbaya, then we've accomplished nothing and we'll be right back here in a few years.
We will be right back here in a few years. Those were her words in 2018, 3 years ago. Her daughter's murderer, he was held to account. But our nation did not impose any meaningful accountability on a president who at the time said that there were very fine people on both sides. And now where are we 3 years later? I'd argue we're not just back where we were. I would argue things are worse. In 2017, it was unfathomable to most of us to think that Charlottesville could happen, just as it was unfathomable to most of us that the Capitol could have been breached on January 6th. Frankly, what unfathomable horrors await us if we do not stand up now and say, no, this is not America? And we will not just express condolences and denunciations. We won't just close the book and try to move on. We will act to to make sure this never happens again.
Representatives Cicilline and Liu will now come to show the harm done and the damage done to Congress and our democratic process. Mr. Cicilline.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, you just heard from my colleague, Manager DeGette, how the conduct of Donald Trump dramatically increased the threats to our security and emboldened violent domestic extremists. I'd like to now turn to the harm that was caused here, inside these walls, as a result of the conduct on January 6th. The harm to us, to Congress, to those who serve our country, and to the constitutional processes as the Trump mob tried to stop the election certification process. The attack on January 6th was one of the bloodiest intrusions in the Capitol since the British invaded in the War of 1812 and burned it to the ground. And you've heard in painstaking detail that the president's mob posed an immediate and serious threat to the continuity and constitutional succession of the United States government. As the first, second, and third in line to the presidency, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, the President pro tem, were all together and faced a common threat in the same location. And we've seen the first and the second were purposely targeted by these attackers. These weren't idle threats. The mob, as you have heard, chanted, "Hang Mike Pence."
Hang Mike Pence! Hang Mike Pence! Hang Mike Pence! Hang Mike Pence!
The charging documents show that the rioters said they would have killed Vice President Pence and Speaker Pelosi had they found them. Dawn Bancroft and Diane Santos Smith, two of the rioters charged in the attack, were caught on tape discussing the brutal violence that they hoped to inflict on Speaker Pelosi had she not been rushed out to safety. They said, quote, "We broke into the Capitol. We got inside. We did our part. And we were looking for Nancy to shoot her in the frigging brain, but we didn't find her," end quote. Senators, simply put, this mob was trying to overthrow our government. And they came perilously close to reaching the first three people in line to the presidency. It wasn't just the vice president and the speaker. Rioters were prepared to attack any member of Congress they found. Thomas Edward Caldwell, Donovan Ray Kroll, and Jessica Marie Watkins, three militia members, were also charged for their role in the attack. They discussed trapping us inside the underground tunnels. The indictment quotes social media chatter with Caldwell, quote, "All members are in the tunnel under Capitol. Seal them in. Turn on gas. All legislators are down in the tunnels, 3 floors down. Do like we had to do when I was in the Corps and start tearing out floors. Go from top to bottom," end quote. Never did any of us imagine that we or our colleagues would face mortal peril by a mob riled up by the President of the United States, the leader of the free world. But we did. All because Donald Trump could not accept his election defeat. Trump chose himself above the people, above our institutions, above our democracy, above all of you. You know, we've heard Trump espouse for years now this America First policy. But his true North Star isn't America's well-being. It's not country first like our dear departed colleague John McCain. No, his directive is Trump first, no matter the cost, no matter the threat to our democracy. But each and every one of us in this room must agree on one thing. We can never allow the kind of violent attack that occurred on January 6th to ever happen again in this country. In the immediate aftermath, we heard really disturbing accounts from many members of Congress about what they experienced that day. Here are some of those reactions. Following the attack, Representative Dusty Johnson expressed concerns that we had gotten to the point where so many of us had sown the seeds of anger and division.
We were barricaded, and there was some fear, to be sure, but overwhelmingly the emotion that I experienced was one of anger. I just could not believe that this was happening. I could not believe that we had gotten to this point where so many of us had sown these seeds of anger and of division, and we had built this powder keg. And really, we were starting to see this powder keg light up, and it was, frankly, I was furious.
Representative Jason Crow compared the events of this day to his time in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger, something Senator Reid knows something about.
What I felt in the Capitol behind us is something that I haven't felt since I was in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger. And to think that as a member of Congress in 2021, in the U.S. Capitol on the House floor, that I was preparing to fight my way out of the People's House against a mob is just beyond troubling.
Representative Pat Fallon was humbled by his experience on January 6th and described the events as surreal as they unfolded here in the Capitol.
It was something that I just never thought I'd see this in our nation's capital, and particularly in the House chamber. It was surreal when it was unfolding. Well, you know, what was interesting was the bravery and the courage of some of my fellow members. When we got to a point where the mob was banging on the doors, and all that kept them from reaching the chamber itself was the doors and then some furniture that we had moved and some Capitol Police, and they needed to be augmented. And so Tony Gonzalez, a new freshman rep from Texas, and Ronnie Jackson and Troy Nels and Mark Wayne Mullen stepped in, and we broke off furniture. Some of the hand sanitizer stations are on these big giant poles, wooden poles, and we turned them upside down, and we were ready to actually have the street fight in the House chamber. It was unbelievable.
Many members that day wondered if they would ever see their families again. As the rioters breached the Capitol and they were outnumbered and trapped inside, they were calling loved ones to say goodbye. Representative Dan Kildee was one of them. Listen to how he described the impact of the riot on him.
I was laying on the floor, trying to, protect myself behind this little wall. And, we all took our pins off because we're certain that if this mob were to come in, that would not be a good thing for them to quickly, easily be able to identify us as members of Congress. And I called my wife, and, it wasn't until I heard her voice that I thought, wow, this is like one of those calls you hear about.
While most coverage is focused on the extreme danger posed to members and the Capitol Police who were targets of this attack, there were lots of other people in the Capitol working on January 6th as well. From personal aides to floor employees, cleaning staff, food service workers. We can't forget all the people that were in harm's way that day. These employees experienced trauma, some coward hiding in places just feet away from where this rabid crowd had assembled. Many were just kids, 20-somethings, who came here to work because they believed in their country and they believed in working to make it better. Others were dedicated food and service workers, all who work incredibly hard to make sure that we can come here and do our jobs. These workers are the lifeblood of the legislative branch. They deserved better. You've already heard from Speaker Pelosi's staff, the staff that was hiding under the conference table, cowering in the dark, making sure that the attackers couldn't hear them. But I'd like to share with you what some other staffers went through. Listen as two staffers recall what they experienced that day.
But then we were seeing on Twitter, on our phones, and then and hearing from some of the police officers on the floor that the building had been breached. Building breached, those were two words I had never heard.
That was particularly stressful, being in a room close to where things are happening and not really knowing what was happening, and seeing it come in live, and getting texts from people, are you okay? And truthfully, I didn't know what was happening. I heard shots fired, shots fired, shots fired, show me your hands, show me your hands. Then I did not know if they were right outside, if they were lots of people with weapons, if there were one shooter, if they had, I didn't know what it looked like. I just knew that there were shots fired outside of the House chamber.
According to reports, one Republican Senate staffer whose office was not far from the floor, quote, took a steel rod and barricaded his door as the rioters banged on his door trying to break in. The New York Times also reported that a senior black staffer was under lockdown for 6 hours during the insurrection, was so disturbed about these events that she quit her job. Another staffer who was on the floor of the House that day described that what happened on January 6th still echoes in his mind. Listen to him describe the moments just before this indelible image.
I heard glass break, and I could see the window panes on the house main door start to pop. And I figured that, obviously I knew they were at the door, and they figured out a way to break the glass. And the last thing I remember before I walked off the floor was several of the police officers had drawn their guns and had their guns trained on the door. Clearly that was, I didn't think there was anything else I could do, and I didn't want to be there for whatever was about to occur. So I got to the top of the stairs. The stairway was pretty packed, and right about that point, I don't know whether it was a police officer or somebody else said, "They're right behind us, run." For me, the thing that I keep thinking about, and again, there isn't a day that hasn't gone by since January 6th that at some point in the day I haven't kind of gone back and picked at some little thing, but the sound of those window panes popping, I won't forget that sound.
I won't forget that sound. How long will the sound of window panes breaking haunt this staffer? And he isn't alone. There are countless people who are still living with the trauma of what happened that day. This includes, by the way, another group of people who were with us in the Capitol on that day, and that's the press. They were in danger, particularly after years of being derided by President Trump as fake news. Kristen Wilson, a reporter for CNN, recently tweeted about her experience.